Ahora, bueno, daríamos paso al siguiente conferenciante, que en este caso es Diego Somavilla, y después daríamos paso al turno de preguntas. So, Diego, here, he's a colleague of us too. He's working on his PhD, first year. He also has a degree in primary school education by the University of Cantabria. And, he has a master's degree on comparative literature. And as I said, right now he's studying, he's in his first year of the PhD, working with Tolkien. Today he's going to be speaking to us about the role of water in Tolkien's work, rain, rivers, lakes, all these kinds of things. And he's also taking into account the influence of some works from Middle and Old English to compare the role of water with the role that this element plays in Tolkien's work. So Diego, when you're ready.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Aitor, for such a kind presentation, and thank you for coming, all of you. So my purpose is going to be to explain the role of water in J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium, focusing on the relationship between his works and the ones that had an influence on his literary career. As the topic for this Congress is from the past to the future, I decided to focus on the following question. How do these works that Tolkien read on the early stages of his career had an influence on his own productions concerning the representations of water? I'm going to explain you the different parts of this presentation. Firstly, I'm going to provide you with some details about theory about the role of water in literature, speaking about a couple of authors who have spoken about this, and just to provide you with some tools for the following analysis of the passages I'm going to talk about. Later on, I'm going to mention a couple of life experiences that Tolkien himself lived during his life, where water was somehow present in his life. And after that, I'm going to explain 4 different works that Tolkien read belonging to the period of Old and Middle English literature that had some influence on his career. They're going to be the epic poem of Beowulf, the poems of the Seafarer, the Wanderer, and Pearl. And finally, I'm going to finish with some conclusion about these passages. Okay, so concerning water in literature, there are several authors who have spoken about this. One of the most interesting theories that I'm going to include here is the distinction of different levels on the role of water in a literary text. I'm going to speak about Patrick Murphy, who provided us with a presentation about eco-criticism and the waters of the world. And he made a distinction between 3 different levels. The first one is going to be the most obvious one, possibly. It's the literal level, when water, a source of water, is portrayed as a setting, as a location where different events take place. As Aitor mentioned before, in its different shapes. We have the sea, but also rivers, oceans, also the rain. Also we could take into account ice, snow, whatever. A second level, which would be on a higher position, would be the symbolic level, which is the one I'm going to focus on most of the time, is the level where water plays a more significant role. It's portrayed as a symbol which can have different meanings. Here I have mentioned some of the meanings that Murphy himself provided as examples, as a destructive force, as a purifying force to heal nature from the damages of evil, from example. And also we have a third level, which would be the highest one, but I'm not going to provide an example from this level. It's a level where water would be a character on itself. It would play the role of a character by itself. Also, I'm going to use a couple of concepts that I'm mentioning here from other authors that talk about eco-criticism, which is the approach that studies the role of nature in literature. The first one is the concept of place sense, which is mentioned by Lawrence Buell in his study The Future of Environmental Criticism. The term of place sense tries to explain how some characters' identities are better explained depending on their relationship with nature. And the second concept, which is the stewardship, is explained, for example, by authors like Matthew Dickinson and Jonathan Evans in their work Ents, Elves, and Eriador, the environmental vision of J.R.R. Tolkien. And the concept of stewardship has a lot to do with the previous one of place sense, but instead it explains that some characters may be better understood because depending on how their relationship with nature, how they behave towards nature, on a less respectful way, on a more respectful way, for example. That we're going to see some examples of that on the passages. Now, as I said, I'm just including two experiences. Maybe there are some more along Tolkien's life, but I'm going to provide two different chapters of his life where he somehow was he had a relationship with water. The first one is on the first years of his life when he moved to Birmingham with his mother, and he spent some years in the village of Serhol. He spent a lot of time playing in this place that you can see in the photo. It's in the village of Serhol, a small village where there is this mill next to the river. It's a place where he used to play with his friends, and that place somehow was always in his mind, even some years later when he started developing his stories. And the second example is some years after, when we went on holidays to Cornwall in 1914. And there are evidences on the letters written by him where he always remembers this place as an ideal landscape, an ideal place for him, the landscape of the coast of Cornwall. Okay, so finally I'm going to get started with the comments on the four works that had some influence in Tolkien concerning the representations of nature. The first one is the Point of Beowulf. I'm just providing you with some details by a previous research carried out by other authors. In the case of Beowulf, I have taken a look at Susana Fidalgo's paper, The Sea in Beowulf, also The Wanderer and The Seafarer, on semantic fields and Mediterranean limitations, where she makes an analysis on the role of water in this poem. One of the most interesting things in this poem is that water is always represented as a hostile element for the characters that participate in the plot. For example, when Beowulf is traveling through the sea is always portrayed as a dangerous place. Also, like Fidalgo mentions, is the dwelling of the beast of the sea. And also the fact that this place is portrayed as a hostile environment, it also reflects this. I'm citing the study by Fidalgo. It reflects the man's feeling of helplessness in front of the power of nature. It means that this power of nature is uncontrollable by men. We're going to see the relationship between this and some passages from Tolkien's works. I've included two examples, one from The Lord of the Rings and another one from the Silmarillion, which are the works that I mostly focused in. The first one is from The Lord of the Rings, and it's from the chapter where the Fellowship is trying to get inside Moria. And just next to the entrance, you may remember that there's a lake with very bad aspect, and the water is muddy and a very bad appearance. And this is not casual, because when they're trying to get inside, they notice that there is an evil creature, the Watcher in the water, which is threatening them in their attempt to get inside. So this is a parallelism with Beowulf. And in the second example, we have in the Silmarillion, almost at the end of the story, we have the case of the fall of Numenor, because the realm of Numenor has been tempted to defy the Valar, and because of that, they are punished, and the whole fleet that is traveling to Valinor is sunk in the sea, and also the island of Numenor itself is sunk under the water, which is I paid attention to this passage because it reminded me to this idea of the feeling of helplessness in front of the power of nature. The men of Numenor have nothing to do against this power of nature. So in that way, I saw another parallelism here. The second poem I'm looking at is The Seafarer, which is much shorter than Beowulf. In this case, I again took advantage of the study by Fidalgo. She mentions that the main character of this poem, which is the seafarer, a person that has spent most of his life traveling through the sea, and who is now living on land, carrying a different lifestyle. This character develops a relationship, a kind of love-hate relationship with the sea. Is that what we know as the term of sea longing. This man misses life at sea, but at the same time, he also remembers about the hardships of that lifestyle, or that life implied lots of different hard living conditions. So it's a mixture of emotions. And also, the second point here is that when the character in this poem expresses himself, shows his feelings, there are some sentences where we somehow perceive that his feelings affect the sea's behavior. For example, I remember about the sentence which is possibly my favorite from the poem. In the poem, there's a sentence which says, "My soul roams with the sea." So, in that way, we see that there is a relationship between the man's feelings and the sea's behavior, which we are going to see clear examples afterwards in Tolkien's works. And finally, we can also see that in this poem, we have two different kinds of journey. The physical journey, which is the journeys described by this man through the sea, and also we cannot ignore the religious implications of this poem, because there is also a description of a metaphorical journey, let's say, which is the journey to heaven, because there is lots of references to God in this poem by this character. So, concerning Tolkien's works, I found three different examples for these three different ideas. For the first one, for this kind of love-hate relationship with the sea, I paid attention to the passage where the elves awakening at the lake of Quibienen. When they first appear here, they are guided by Orome into the continent of Middle-earth, and they finally go across it and arrive to the Great Sea in order to reach afterwards the other different continent of the Undying Lands. When some of these elves first get in contact with the sea, they developed also a kind of love for the sea, and for that reason they decide to stay there, to live there, in order to be next to the sea. They don't want to be separate from the sea. So that is somehow another parallelism with the Seafarer. The second one is another passage from the Silmarillion. It's It takes place just after the episode of the King's Slaying at Alqualonde, when the Noldor have decided to take the Teleri ships by force, killing all of that people. When Uinen, for example, knows about this episode, his grief and his sadness for the Teleri who have been slain, it also affects the sea's behavior, because soon after, some of the ships that the Noldor are using to return to Middle-earth and fight with Morgoth are sunk under the water. The Noldor are punished somehow because of this, because of their own behavior. And the final example has to do with that distinction between the physical journey and the metaphorical journey at the end of the Lord of the Rings. Because if you remember, at the end of the Silmarillion, the continent of the Undying Lands, Valinor, is separated from the physical world. There is no longer a possible direct journey through the sea, but it is separated from the rest of the continent. And at the end of the Lord of the Rings, Frodo and some other characters take a ship and travel to the Undying Lands. So somehow they take part in this kind of journey, from this physical journey, but also the metaphorical journey, because Frodo goes there in order to recover and enjoy some rest after his task of taking the One Ring to Mordor. The following example is the poem of the Pearl, where water plays somehow the role of a border. In this case, I've included here the study of Courtney Lechman, which is titled Water, Prestige and Christianity, an Eco-Critical Look on Medieval Literature. And she mentions just this idea. Water plays the role of a border between two different worlds, because in the Point of Pearl, if you're not familiar with it, there is a character, a man, who is in the middle of a dream, and he finds himself next to a river, and at the other side of the river he sees a woman and starts to talk with her, because he says that he has lost a pearl, which is later discovered to be his dead daughter. And he starts to talk with that woman, and they at the same time they begin to walk along the two shores of the river. And at the end of the poem, he also sees a city at the other side of the river, which is a portrayal of paradise, if you wish. And he wants to go across the river. He talks with the woman. He says that he wants to go to that city in order to see if his daughter is there. But the woman warns him that in order to cross the river, he must commit his life to God. He must carry a righteous life with some clear values. And somehow this river also acts as a border that in order to cross it, you need to develop a learning process. And the fact that the man is unable to cross this river, because at the end of the poem, finally he tries to cross the river, but just before doing it, he wakes up from that dream. And after waking up, he has learned that lesson, that he must commit his life to God. So that idea, the fact of being unable to cross the river, is the event that completes that learning process. There are some examples in Tolkien's works, both in the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. In the Silmarillion, we have the example of Dorlas, for example, who is following and helping Túrin in his chase after Glaurung. But when they come to the river Teigling, Dorlas is unable to cross that river because he's afraid, he's not capable of crossing that river, and he retreats. He leaves Túrin and Hunthor, the other character that follows Túrin, he leaves them alone, and soon after he is also killed. In the Lord of the Rings, we have two more examples. The first one happens at the end of the first part, the Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo and Sam cross the Anduin River. The reason to do this is that Frodo has just been fighting with Boromir because Boromir has tried to steal the ring from him. And Frodo has learned, somehow he has gone through that learning process, he has learned that the ring is no longer safe with the rest of the Fellowship, and he needs to have the ring safe. In the first place, he pretends to go alone, but Sam, as you know, follows him, and they cross the river together. And the other example is Faramir's dream in the Two Towers. When Frodo and Sam again meet Faramir, Faramir explains that he has known about Boromir, his brother's death, in a dream where Faramir has been walking inside a river and has seen the vessel that carries Boromir's body. So the parallelism of this example with the poem of the Pearl is not that much of the learning process, but the role of the river in dreams. So that is the comparison that I wanted to make here. So the final example is the poem The Wanderer, which talks about a man who is living alone. He has been forced to live alone in a steppe, and the fact of being alone makes that man becoming a wiser man. He also goes through a personal development process, and this life helps him to reflect and to learn how to be a wiser man. The only example that I found to make a relationship between these two works is the story of Eärendil that Martin talked about of him to us yesterday. Eärendil is the son of Tuor and Idril, and after the fall of Gondolin, he's asked by the Valar to travel through the sky in his ship Vingilot, carrying with him one of the Silmarils. This idea, this need of traveling alone in the ship, is perhaps because of the decision he has taken together with his wife Elwyn to be counted with the immortal, with the elves. So, but that was the fact of traveling through the sky, also to guard the void where Morgoth was condemned after the War of the Wrath, is somehow the price that he has to pay. Just to finish, a couple of conclusions. Okay, as you can see in the different examples I have provided, the role of water in Tolkien's works, both in the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, goes far beyond from being a mere setting, just a location. It plays a significant role in both plots, so it must be taken into account. As I also mentioned at the beginning, the identity of some of the characters is defined by their relationship with nature. For example, as I told you in the case of the Noldor and Fëanor, mainly, is defined because of their relationship with nature. He decides to cross the sea at any cost. If it means slaying the Teleri, he doesn't care about that. So another conclusion that I found is that the representations of water in the Silmarillion, as you know, the Silmarillion was a word that Tolkien began to think about from the very beginning, and it took almost the whole of his career to write it. He even didn't finish it in time because it was finally published after his death. In the Silmarillion, you see that the representations of water are very, very, very different. You have lots of different examples. The representations of water have lots of different meanings, lots of different symbols. and they're going to have some influence in the ones that you find in the Lord of the Rings, which is a work that was written in a later period. So the ones that you find in the Silmarillion are going to affect the representations of water in the Lord of the Rings. And finally, just to mention the last idea, as you may all be familiar with that, Tolkien's concerns about nature and its preservation that we have been talking about since yesterday, they are present during his whole literary career. So that is all for the moment. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.